Dear friends, I welcome you all to this e-seminar. Today's topic is independence of judiciary. This gentleman needs no introduction. The topic is addressed by Mr. Kapil Sipal, former Union Minister and Senior Advocate. Sir, I'm thankful and grateful to you, sir, for accepting my invitation. Sir, today's session is an interactive session. After Sir delivers a lecture, participants are free to ask questions. In, Before that, introduce yourselves and ask questions. Sir, now I welcome you, sir, and enlighten us, sir.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I'm delighted to be with you once again. I remember a couple of years ago, I was invited by the association again to talk about the judiciary. But since then, many things have happened. The nature of the judiciary seems to be changing. And there are a lot of concerns that not just the legal fraternity, but the members of the public have about the manner in which and the perception that has developed about the independence of the judiciary, which is the topic for discussion. I will divide it into 4 parts. First of all, I'll talk about what independence means qua a judge, qua an individual judge. That will be the first part of my talk. The second part of my talk will be what does institutional independence mean? Because it is one thing to say a judge is independent. It's another thing to say that the institution is independent. So the second part of my talk will be on that issue. The third part of my talk will be on why there is a perception amongst the legal fraternity as well as the general public that the judiciary is not perceived to be independent. And I will then cite some examples as to why this has happened. Last of all, I'll talk about what is the vision under the Constitution about the role of the judiciary. And what are our expectations from this institution? These are the 4 parts of my speech, my talk today. Let me come back to the first one, that is, for a judge when he decides a case, what do you mean by independence? Actually, there is no need to define it either. Because when you look at the scales of justice, that tells you what that independence means. What it means is that the judge is meant to resolve disputes. And in the process of resolving those disputes, he has to balance competing claims and competing concerns. Those competing concerns and competing claims may have a bearing on the legal framework in the context of which those concerns and claims have arisen. And the judge also needs to look at equity. If the judge finds that the law seems to be in favor of A, in the overall context of the competing claims and concerns, equity is in favor of B, then he needs to balance the law with the equity. That should be how a judge proceeds in a matter. Many times we find that on issues, sometimes the judge overlooks the law or he jettisons the law. Sometimes we find that the judge is extremely mechanical in the way he perceives the law and forgets about the equity. So that is our expectation when we go to a judge, that he needs to have that balance, which is the symbol of justice at the individual level. Then there is the issue of procedural fairness. You may decide a matter one way or the other. You may look at the law, you may look at the equity, but there is a procedure that is established by law by which a judge who embraces independence wishes to proceed in the matter. And that procedure requires fairness. And what does fairness mean? It means that the judge must listen to both sides attentively. It means that both sides should be entitled to place their concerns without fear or favor. And that opportunity should be given to both sides so there is no procedural unfairness. That's when deciding a particular matter, when a judge is seized of a case. So the opportunity to present the case by one side and the other must be full in every aspect of the matter. Of course, if lawyers are trying to repeat themselves or lawyers are not citing the right law, of course the judge will intervene. And the last most important attribute of an independent judge is his ability to listen. See, part of communication and an essential part of communication is the ability to listen. A lot of times we find the judge talking, not listening. And remember, when you listen, you're able to appreciate a point of view. If you stop listening, you will never appreciate that point of view. So these are attributes which are essential to a judge who seeks to decide a matter without fear or favor. And those are our expectations in respect of the attributes of a judge when he is given the task of deciding a case, which is, I think, a divine task. So that's on what independence means, qua a judge who decides the case. The next issue is, what does institutional independence mean? And that's very important. When I talk about institutional independence, I mean the institutional integrity, which is the foundation of an independent judiciary. What does institutional integrity mean? That there are various layers in terms of which justice is delivered. You have the trial court processes. You have the appellate court processes. You have the appeals in the High Court. You have original side jurisdiction in High Courts. Then you have the Supreme Court over and above all that. Now, this entire structure must be perceived to have institutional integrity. Now, this is a matter, to my mind, of great concern to us, because we find that at the level of the trial court, there are a lot of misgivings that lawyers and the public has about the manner in which matters are decided at the level of the trial court. And a lot of allegations are made. So we have to be very careful that those who are dispensing justice at the trial court level, the judges who are dispensing justice, are judges who will not be subject to any form of pressure. And that's, I think, a matter of great concern as far as the institution is concerned, because a lot of times we find that we don't have the level of confidence that we should have in respect of a judge who decides matters at the trial court level. The second issue is the issue of appointment of judges. And I think that is fundamental if we have to be really concerned about institutional integrity. As you know, the process of appointment has been subject to a lot of controversy over the years. And ever since the judgment of the Supreme Court in the Advocates on Record Association case, where I believe the Supreme Court, in a sense, usurped the power of appointment to itself. I happen to be one of the guilty parties because in the context in which we argued the case at that point in time, one felt that there was too much executive interference in the appointment of judges to the higher judiciary. And in that context, the Constitution bench then rendered that judgment. But over the years, we have found that that judgment has in fact done great disservice to institutional integrity. And it's interesting to note that the late Justice Verma, who was part of that bench, lamented ultimately, including Justice Venkatachalaya, ultimately lamented on the fact that they had rendered that judgment, because they realized that the objectives on the basis of which they rendered that judgment had not been realized, and that institutional integrity, institutional independence was in fact in jeopardy. And we see this in what has been happening in courts over the years. We see Chief Justices coming from one High Court, coming to the Supreme Court, and they bring along with them their preferences, their likes, their dislikes, and then they lobby for the judges who they like to bring them up to the Supreme Court. We have had Chief Justices in this country, and nothing is hidden from the bar. We know of their associations when they were High Court judges. We know of their likes and dislikes. And therefore, they ensure that people who they are fond of and who, for whatever reasons they like, are strategically appointed at a given point in time for them to become Chief Justices of the Supreme Court or become senior to other judges who are appointed later and who might have expected that they should have been appointed earlier. And many a times we find that there is a friction between the Chief Justice of India and the first puisne, because the first puisne may have been senior in the High Court, but finds that he was appointed later, and therefore there is that friction that goes on. But be that as it may, it's the process of selection of judges to the Supreme Court, which is now through closed-door proceedings, in which really the Chief Justice has complete control. The Chief Justice of India has complete control. So the kind of consultation that is required to give institutional integrity to those processes are completely absent. And therefore, I do believe that this procedure of 1+4, which is the collegium procedure, has really not worked. And we find friction in the processes of appointments to judges of the Supreme Court. And this is also true of appointments to judges to the High Court, either coming from the bar or being promoted from the sessions and district judges in the order of seniority. So this is a matter of great concern to me as one who is wedded to the cause of independence of the judiciary. And I think the time has come, and I don't know how it will happen, that this procedure of the collegium appointing judges completely in their control, and actually in the control of the Chief Justice, without any really broad consultative process, is something that seems to have hurt the cause of independence of the judiciary as an institution. The third aspect of this is the issue of financial autonomy. And I think that there needs to be a paradigm shift to ensure that high courts in our country, the Supreme Court of India, have enough financial autonomy to serve the cause of justice. And many a times we find that because of the litigant public who need instant justice, they don't have enough judges at the trial court level, not enough judges at the High Court level. If there are enough vacancies, if there are enough substantive posts in the High Court level, there are enough people who are appointed, and so that lots of high courts have huge vacancies which have not been filled so far. This is great disservice to the large litigant public in this country, because if people don't have recourse to go to a judge because of the paucity of judges, and 50, 60, 70, 80 matters are listed in the trial courts to be decided, how will this serve the cause of justice? Of course, the other problem is that we don't have enough talented people, we don't have enough experienced people to elevate them in the position of judges at various levels. That's, of course, unless you give financial autonomy, unless courts are able to build the kind of infrastructures required for a judge at every level of the judicial structure, the cause of justice will not be served. And I think these purse strings, which are controlled by the government, there should be some constitutional amendment to ensure that there is enough financial economy at the level of chief justices, at the level of high courts, so that the needs of the community are addressed by providing them with the necessary wherewithal, so that they can approach courts for redressal of their grievances. The fourth issue is the issue of individual integrity. Now, by and large, we do believe that our courts are manned by judges who have integrity. But we also find very senior misdemeanors committed by members of the higher judiciary, which are known to the legal fraternity. We are also known to judges. But as usual, if you are a member of a family, the family always wishes to protect you. And we've seen that happen time and again. And that, again, is a matter of great concern. I mean, I don't want to take any examples, but the fact of the matter is that the late, our ex-Chief Justice of India, who was charged or who is alleged to have committed certain acts which were not expected of him, sitting in that high position, for him to have sat on a Saturday on the bench itself, presiding on the bench itself, when allegations concerned him, and given a speech in his defense, is something that I don't think that this has ever happened in judicial history of any country, leave alone India. Certainly it never happened in India. And obviously there was not enough courage within the legal fraternity and the judiciary itself to ensure that that the cause of justice was actually ensured by taking up the matter. But I think, again, we find that that particular procedure, in a sense, had a huge impact on the public mind. Litigants in the court, the public at large felt that this was something that should not have been allowed. And then we found that the order that was passed on that Saturday was not even signed by the Chief Justice of India, but was signed by the other two judges while three of them were sitting together. So, and we've also had, as you know, we moved for impeachment of the previous Chief Justice, previous to the one that I'm talking about. And there were very grave charges against him as well. But again, that was blocked at the political level because the present chairman of the Rajya Sabha, who's the Vice President of India in his capacity as chairman, decided to dismiss the motion itself, which of course, according to us again, was contrary to the law. And certain procedural things happened in the Supreme Court at that point in time, with overnight benches being constituted, constitution bench being constituted, and ready to hear the matter. And we, from a strategic standpoint, decided to withdraw that particular challenge, because we realized that at least in the absence of a possible judgment against us, we would be able to deal with that legal issue at a later point in time and on another occasion. But these are just two very serious instances of questionable conduct of certain members of the higher judiciary. But of course, there are many other instances which have come to light, and I'm not talking about the Supreme Court, across the board, and various high courts as well, which is a matter of great concern. Then, of course, I do believe that when we talk about independence of the judiciary as an institution, we cannot segregate the responsibility of the bar from it. And my great, I say it with great despair, that our bars are divided on political lines. Our bars are also divided on other lines. And I think that as lawyers, we should only be concerned with the rule of law and nothing else, no matter which political party is in power. Because democracy will be alive and thriving only if the bar is active and passionately embraces the concept of rule of law. If the bar believes that the foundation of democracy is the rule of law, and that the bar cannot be divided on political lines. And therefore you find that, say, in other jurisdictions like in the United States of America, the bar is united. They don't take sides on issues like this. And they are actively involved not in politics, but in ensuring that the rule of law survives. And I think that the bar has completely failed in being an active force to ensure that the institutional integrity is maintained. The other great concern I have is the power of the Chief Justice of the High Court and of the Supreme Court of India being the master of the roster to decide which case goes where at which point in time. Now, I have no problems with the exercise of that power. I don't blame any Chief Justice of India, because ultimately there is an administrative decision to be made as to which court goes where. But there must be standard procedures on the basis of which that power is exercised. And those standard procedures must be transparent. In other words, we can't have a situation where suddenly, out of the blue...
Disconnected. He left us.
Okay, sir.
He's coming back now.
Okay.
Then so that authorization is...
Sorry. Suddenly we find that some matter concerning somebody is suddenly placed before some judge. Now, and there are not just one instance, there are any number of instances of this. Now, that's a matter of great concern to us. And this is something that was raised both in the impeachment motion and otherwise also talked about. But there is no response from the judiciary on this aspect. And how did when we raised this issue, how did the judiciary respond to it? The then Chief Justice said, well, all benches will deal with this matter. Which meant that the Chief Justice could, in a given matter, send it to any bench he liked. Now, that can't be a solution. That's not trying to solve the problem. That's, in fact, aggravating the problem. So the element of discretion, of unbridled discretion in this regard, is not something that is consistent with the rule of law. And remember, these are administrative decisions. We're not criticizing any judicial decision. These are administrative decisions. And we can never challenge that decision in any forum at all because it happens to be the Chief Supreme Court of India. So that's a matter also of some concern, should be of some concern to all of us. And that's true not only at the level of the Supreme Court, it's also true at the level of the High Courts. Perhaps one of the reasons why on January 16, 2019, four judges of the Supreme Court, including one who became the Chief Justice of India and was alleged to have committed certain acts, went public and made a statement to the effect that they felt that democracy was in danger and that their conscience demanded them to express their concerns to the public at large. Now, the lawyers are not at fault in any of this. If within the system, the members of the judiciary within the Supreme Court themselves feel that something is amiss, then that needs to be addressed because it impacts institutional independence in a big way. And I'm afraid that's not been addressed at any given point in time. So that finishes my broad comments on what I believe should be the parameters of institutional independence and what are the fault lines that we are confronted with in achieving that objective. The third issue is, why is there a perception of the judiciary not being independent? And this is a perception. Again, you find that in certain cases, if an individual goes, his matter is not listed for days. And in other cases, where the matter is not a matter of great concern, it is listed overnight, even though the petition may not be complete in all aspects. Why is this being done? And why should this be done? There must be some logical reason for it, and I don't deny that. But that logical reason is beyond the perception of the legal fraternity, which sees this happening day in and day out. The same, and this of course emanates from what is called the master of the roster power. We know for a fact that many judges who have delivered some seminal judgment, or about to deliver seminal judgments, or about to deliver judgments, are suddenly transferred. Just most recently, in the context of the pandemic in Gujarat, there was a division bench which delivered a judgment. And suddenly, that case was taken away and went to another division bench, because the judgment was scathing in its criticism of the manner in which COVID-19 was handled in some of the facilities in the state of Gujarat. We had an instance of a judge in the Delhi High Court who, of course, had agreed to his transfer to Punjab, but obviously there was pressure on him to agree. It was not necessary. He's one of our finest judges. But there were certain judgments that he gave. So the perception is that this may have happened because of the fact that the judge was rendering orders without fear or favor. And therefore, it was better to remove him from this jurisdiction. And when he was going to decide a particular matter, even though he had agreed to the transfer, he was overnight shifted. Now, this creates a perception in the minds of the public and the legal fraternity that something is amiss. We have a judge who is now in the Supreme Court, who rendered a judgment while he was Chief Justice of Uttarakhand, setting aside the imposition of President's rule, who was to come to Supreme Court, but his elevation was delayed for a long period of time. And when he wanted to be transferred to another high court, even that was not allowed. It's after a long time. So the judge, he has come to the Supreme Court, but he loses out on seniority. And this is something that would obviously rancor anybody who has been treated in this fashion. And again, the matter of the legal fraternity perceives that this was done for ulterior reasons. We've also had situations where a judge of Gujarat, one of the finest judges of that court, because he rendered a particular judgment, was to become Chief Justice of India, of a particular high court. It didn't happen. And the collegium also didn't put its foot down. I'm just giving these examples to tell you as to why there is that perception. Then you have situations where habeas corpus petitions, which ought to be heard the following day, are, notice is given in for 4 weeks, for 3 weeks. But this is unheard of. This is contrary to our jurisprudence. And there is no reason as to why this should be done. A judge is entitled to decide a matter one way or the other. But why should a habeas corpus petition be delayed? And why should the hearing not take place as quickly as possible? We've had situations where I have been party to a litigation where a law officer has not even filed appropriate orders under 144 because he chose not to file. And the judiciary didn't ask him as to why you haven't filed. He said, I'm just giving these orders as an example. But it effected a lockdown in the state of Jammu and Kashmir in various areas. He was to provide orders in each district, never did so. And the judiciary did nothing about it. And having held the law in our favor through a very well-reasoned judgment, it's not been implemented. And again, we see no action. So then what is the conclusion that you are to come to? That there is a perception, which I talked about. And then important cases are not heard. Demonetization, challenge to demonetization, which happened as far back as 2016, still pending. No possibility of a date. We know nothing about it. We know how the enforcement directorate, the CBI, and other institutions are being misused. And matters come up from time to court. And some of the provisions of law that need to be addressed by the Supreme Court as far as their constitutionality is concerned is 144A of the Penal Code and provisions under the UAPA. Even the pandemic and the issues relating to the pandemic were not immediately addressed. And what is of great concern is that the statement of a law officer that there were no migrants on the road was accepted by the court without anything more. And there are very detailed provisions under the Disaster Management Act of 2005 which set out in detail how there has to be a national plan in the event of a national disaster. The court has till date not asked the government to place its plan before the court, and how it has implemented the provisions of that act, which require the government under Section 12. And this is very interesting because perhaps you don't know. Under Section 12 of the Act, and I'll read it, the national authority is the authority which is presided over by the Prime Minister with 9 nominees of the government, shall recommend guidelines for the minimum standards of relief to be provided to persons affected by the disaster. Till date, no minimum standards of relief have been provided, which have to be provided by the national authority under this act. Minimum requirements to be provided in the relief camps in relation to shelter, to food, drinking water, medical cover, sanitation. These are all mandatory provisions of the act. And what the court is talking about is how migrants should reach their home and how trains should be, how the railway should organize trains for migrants to reach their home. But at the time when shelters were provided, there were no minimum standards set. And there is no accountability of the government, even under a national act. Special provisions to be made for widows and orphans during a national disaster. We hear nothing about it. Ex gratia assistance on account of loss of life. So people who have lost their lives, they have to be given ex gratia assistance. We don't hear about it. We don't see the judiciary take up the matter. Damage, restoration of means of livelihood, people who have lost their jobs. We hear nothing from the judiciary on this issue. And other reliefs. Not only that, Section 13 says the national authority may, in cases of disasters of severe magnitude, recommend relief in repayment of loans or for grant of fresh loans to persons affected by disaster. All this is being decided by financial institutions and through directions of the Reserve Bank of India. But these have to be policy decisions under Section 13 by the national authority itself. We hear nothing about that. So what does it mean? That issues that concern the nation are not being taken up immediately as they should be. And that too is a matter of concern, and therefore there is a perception that that's only a perception, and these are some examples for the reason of that perception, that the judiciary may may not be discharging its constitutional mandate in the manner that we believe it should. And of course, the last point is why are there courts in this country under the Constitution? See, the state is such a powerful entity that it cannot be easily disturbed. Powerful entity, in fact, disturbs citizens. The leitmotif of any court of law must be to protect our citizens. Each judge must have a liberal attitude in the context of protecting the rights of those who are at the bottom of the ladder, the marginalized, the poor, the ones who are persecuted. We find that the higher judiciary, in fact, gives great credence to what the state says and is not the kind of liberal court that the constitution makers, perhaps, I think, and that's my belief, expected the courts to be. So these are the four issues I wanted to just touch upon. I think we'll have occasion to deal with it at another time, but now I'd be very happy to take any questions that you wish to ask. Thank you very much.
The participants are free to ask questions. Before that, introduce yourselves and please ask questions. Sneha, you conduct that.
Sir, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Sir, now you have your friend and comrade, your Member of Parliament, Mr. Tiruchi Siva, with you. He will be your first person to interact with you, sir.
Okay.
So I'm unmuting your comrade, sir, so both of you all can interact. Sir, sir, yes, sir. Welcome to the session, sir. Others, kindly unmute your audio, please, so that we only hear both the doyens speaking to each other.
Now.
Hello, how are you? I hope you're safe.
Good morning, Kapilji.
Good morning, good morning. I hope you're safe.
Yeah, it's like everyone. Quarantine for the past 100 days. And good to see you today, at least on this meeting.
Thank you.
And it was so nice to hear you after a long time.
Thank you.
Kapilji, let me confine myself to the question.
Yes.
In a democratic country, the role of judiciary is very wide. And the independence of the judiciary has been ensured in our constitution too. And you cited one or two examples where the judicial officers are not able to function as they should. And of course, see, in the recent history, we have never come across more Supreme Court judges came out and on media, they explained the situation that is prevailing, how they are not able to act independently and all. And the present political scenario, we all know that the intervention of the politics in judiciary has become an interruption rather. And I would like just to ask this question because people repose their confidence in judiciary. And judiciary being one of the very important pillars in a democracy. The challenge that has been thrown to the judiciary at this juncture and the constraints which the judicial officers are facing, and as you said, the bar, the advocates, and all have a role. Will it be successfully faced, and will the judiciary establish independence in the coming days? Because I think only that will decide the future course of the process of democracy in our country. Thank you very much.
But that's a comment, that's not a question. I entirely agree with you. I think that judiciary has to play a far more proactive role in the context of state action. And this particular regime in Delhi is in fact making all attempts to ensure that the judiciary does not deal with the real issues that confront the nation. and its wit seems to be somewhat effective in that matters which concern the nation are not even being listed for hearing.
Will the judiciary be able to come over that? That's my
I think it will take a long time. I think it
concern.
will take a long time. I think we've reached a point when the judiciary is almost at its nadir, and I think that it will require a national effort and a national consensus, because remember the distance between autocracy and freedom is impacted by what the judiciary does to protect the people of the country. And in the absence of that, this state is slowly moving towards an autocratic totalitarian state, without it being so declared.
This is Dr. Sampath. No, this is Dr. Sampath.
Sir, 1 second, sir. 1 second, sir. We have got our senior counsel, Maslamani, sir, who wants to address the issue. Sir, Maslamani, sir, is there.
Mr. Kavil Sibal, I have.
Yes.
Is it audible? Is it audible?
Maslamani, sir, you are audible, but your video is not proper, sir. Your face is not, we are not able to see you.
Oh, I am not
yes,
a very
sir.
bright face. I am not a very bright face. I am very old man.
I saw it and you're very bright. Don't say that. You have a very bright
Now,
face.
I have got one concern.
Yes.
In the present scenario, even the Attorney General of India is now advocating the Court of Appeal in 4 or 5 areas in the India,
Right.
dividing the Supreme Court into 5 or 4 areas.
Right.
Under the number, it will be easier to manipulate and tamper with them. If the constitutional bench of the Supreme Court is going to be a smaller number of 5 or 8 persons only, and the remaining goes into the Court of Appeal, the Supreme Court number who is going to decide the fate of this country, the constitutionalism, the basic structure, the interpretation of the Constitution shall vest with a smaller number of the people. If such a smaller number of people's hands it is vested with, it is the more dangerous in the days to come. Therefore, I have got a great reservation about the Court of Appeal being established and the Supreme Court is being divided into a smaller number of groups and smaller, very small number, a minuscule number of Supreme Court judges being invested in the interpretation of the Constitution.
Maslamani, sir,
This is
please,
my
sir.
concern about the Court of Appeal. So
Well,
that will also have a great impact on the functioning and the independence of the judiciary and the great concern of the people of India for their rights, liberty, property, and their own freedom in this country in the years to come. I am not talking about any individual. And the parties might come, any absolute power is likely to intimidate with the judiciary. This is my concern.
All right. Let me just respond very quickly. See, at the moment, there is not one Supreme Court. There are several Supreme Courts that are functioning, because Supreme Court judges sit in benches of 2 or 3 or 5, as the case may be, and 5 very rarely. So you have several Supreme Courts who render judgments maybe inconsistent with each other. But be that as it may, I personally feel that Supreme Court should be an institution where all judges sit together, whether it's 11 or it's 13, right? So that there can be no issue of master of the roster. All constitutional matters should be decided by the Supreme Court as an entity, right? That's number one. The Court of Appeal should not be a constitutional court of the Supreme Court. No. A Court of Appeal may be a final Court of Appeal on facts, but constitutional issues, and that can be, because remember, today, a person from Orissa, a person from Kerala, a person from West Bengal cannot come to Supreme Court. It's impossible. Most of the litigation you will find is either from Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, Haryana, Maharashtra, Punjab, and some of the neighboring states. Very little. So you should, I think there should be a mechanism of a final Court of Appeal, not a constitutional court, as you rightly said, in the regions, with constitutional issues being decided by one court sitting together. I think that may be a matter of discussion that we can take forward. Thank you.
My concern only one, I'll only repeat one concern. The smaller the number, the constitutional court to be. If now there
It's
are
not a
about 30
constitutional
judges.
court. It's not, it will be a court of appeal, not a court. I'm telling you.
No. I am only deriving that the courts have been established separately as a permanent benches. The number of judges who will be available to deal with the constitutional bench will be very few. And
No, but at the
so-
moment, I don't agree. You see, what will happen is that all discretion will be over. Then they will have to sit together to decide. Not so easy. Not so easy. In any case, today it's the same thing with the master of the roster. You send it to a bench and it decides. What's the difference? Anyway, I think this is a matter of discussion. I won't sort of give.
Yes. Thank you
my
very
final
much.
view. I
I
appreciate
will
your
put
question.
across my concern.
Sir, we have got yet another senior counsel of our bar, Mr. Vidudalai, sir.
Yes.
One is-
Vidudalai, sir?
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, sir,
Yes,
you're
sir.
audible,
Yeah.
sir.
I got two questions to ask you, sir.
Yes.
Do you think that cooling off period for retired judges before accepting alternative assignment would further the cause of independence of judiciary? Number one. Number two, whether the appointment for life for the apex court judges would ensure better independence of judiciary. Your
Whether-
take on that.
What's the second question? Sorry.
Whether the appointment for life
Oh,
for the apex court judges
right.
would vastly improve or ensure the independence of the judiciary. What are your takes on that?
First of all, the take on the first question is there must be a cooling off period. I entirely agree with you. There should be a cooling off period, at least 3 years.
3 years.
Number two, there should never be any appointments for life. Because the kind of appointments we see, if they are there for life, we've had it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for the wonderful lecture.
I am
We have got our senior counsel, ARL Sundaresan, sir, for you. He's
Yes.
with a supposed to be a very tough question, I suppose. Sundaresan, sir?
Yes.
You're there
Sir.
on board, sir?
Sir, good afternoon. And
Good afternoon.
nice to hear the lecture from you, sir.
Thank you.
One question which I would like to ask you.
Yes.
The institutional independence you have addressed a lot. There is lots
Yes.
of doubt with regard to the institutional independence as it stands.
Yes.
When that is so, the tribunalization and the appointment to those tribunals
Yes.
has much to desire. The appointments are made by the government, the technical
Yes.
members or the other auditor members, the environmental members in the NGT, they are all chosen. The electricity commission, electricity appellate tribunal, the stakes are so heavy. And the judgments of the Honorable Supreme Court earlier was the independence of judiciary should not be lost. There should be only judicial members who will be the president or the chairman. But now the tilt of the Supreme Court is that it is not necessary that the chairman should be the judicial member. Even the others can be the presiding officers. Don't you think that it is a very, very adverse impact on the independence of judiciary and the government taking reins over several tribunals?
Let me answer that. My answer is the following. I think that the tribunalization has been an utter disaster. The
Yes.
tribunalization itself has been an utter disaster, and the experience has been very unsavory because the government controls tribunals, according to me. Number two, the fact that a non-judicial member can be appointed to preside over a tribunal is a worse disaster.
Yes, sir. Yes.
I am, in fact, against the tribunalization process because this was meant to reduce the burden on judges of the High Court.
Yes.
What it has done is not serve the cause of justice and increase the burden on the Supreme Court. And Supreme Court doesn't have time to decide on appeals on questions of fact. So really speaking, you have no forum other than the tribunal itself, which becomes the final court. And that's really not the kind of objective with which we set up these tribunals.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Sir, yet again, another comrade of yours, Mr. N.R. Ilango is ready, sir.
Yes.
Hello,
N.R.
sir.
Ilango, sir.
How are you?
I'm fine, sir. Good, sir. Sir, basically my question is on the criminal law. Sir, sir was talking about the public perception.
Yeah.
Sir, I could see the increasing trend in the judiciary is they devote themselves to the public perception in utter disregard to the rule of evidence. They appreciate evidence to the public perception. Sir, that is a definite inroad into the independence of judiciary. Sir, your comment on this?
I entirely agree. And in fact, the Chief Justice that I was talking about, recently made a statement that judges are guided by influenced by public perception. He himself said so. But when asked, what about you? He said, no, I was not influenced, but judges are influenced by public perception.
Sir.
And in fact, you have raised a very important point. And that point is that all these draconian laws have draconian provisions for bail, right?
Yes, sir.
And now, under the UAPA, for example, you can name an individual as a terrorist, right? Now, who are being prosecuted under this act? Journalists, students,
Yes.
Political activists, those who have raised their voices to protect the Dalit community, those who raise their voices to protect Adivasis. They are the people who are being prosecuted under the UAPA, and the Supreme Court does nothing about it. Why? Because the government comes and tells Supreme Court, oh, there is a great stratagem to destabilize India, as if an individual in this country can destabilize a country. That only shows lack of confidence of the government in its own stability, rather than thinking that an individual can destabilize. And the government the courts do not actively deal with these matters. I entirely agree with you.
Sir, one or two small questions, sir.
Yes.
Sir was saying that the bar, in fact, we feel that we are a family with the judiciary. So we sort of tend to protect the judiciary.
Right.
Sir, in your view, what is the role of the bar at this present trend? When we saw the independence of judiciary totally in the air, it's given up totally, or on the higher side. What is the role of the bar and responsibility of the bar vis-a-vis the contempt of?
I think the responsibility of the bar is not being discharged by us. Quite frankly, we're a divided bar.
Yes.
And we are so badly divided that there is no one voice that will protect the rule of law. Sorry?
The solution for that, sir.
The solution is that members of the bar, there should be rules in every bar association that anybody who makes a political statement, right, will be issued a show cause notice, right? And maybe his membership can be taken away.
Sir.
And anybody who actively associates himself with politics when dealing with matters of law, should be dealt with by the bar associations. If in all associations such a rule is prescribed, you may have some semblance of balance that's necessary.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sir, next we have advocate from Coimbatore, Mr.
Last
K.R.
question,
Shankar.
because I have a press conference at 1:00. So
Okay, sir, this will be the last question, sir, from one Mr. K.R. Shankaran from Coimbatore. Sir.
Yeah.
One
Yes.
question from my side.
Shankaran, sir.
Hello, sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I introduce myself as a colleague to your senior advocate, Mr. K.V. Vishwanathan.
Oh, I see. Okay.
He was attached to our office in Coimbatore earlier.
He is a fine advocate.
Yes, he used to tell me a lot about you, sir. Lot about you. My only question is, I mean, it's somewhat related to senior advocate Mr. N.R. Ilango's question, I think. That what is your take on the role of media in the independence of judiciary? The influence that the media
No, I
by
think
media trials. Media trials.
yes. There are two issues that I need to address. Since it's the last question, let me take a minute or two.
Yes, sir.
The first issue is that there are two kinds of media. There is one, the mainstream media.
Yes.
Then there is the social media
Okay.
platform.
Right.
Now, as far as the mainstream media is concerned, it is funded by politics, right? And it supports the prominent ones who have all the money support the power, those who are in power, right?
Yes, sir. Yes.
This has completely contrary to any concept of media's responsibility.
Yes.
And courts must interfere to ensure that this kind of see, remember, you must segregate politics or views from news. The media's responsibility is to give news.
Correct.
Media's responsibility is not to generate views.
Exactly.
Right. The views will be decided by the viewer. The result is that I'm sure none of us want to watch television anymore.
Yeah.
And this is a violation of the very concept of an independent media. And this is another issue because I think 19(1)(a) has been misinterpreted. 19(1)(a) is free speech.
Okay.
But this is commercial speech. This is not free speech anymore.
Well said, sir. Yeah.
It is commercial speech because the views expressed are through the interests of communities, the interest of the party in power and of industrial establishments who fund the mainstream media. Right? That's one thing. When it comes to the social media, the situation is far more serious. Because in the social media, there is no liability and accountability. The laws that apply to mainstream media, which are not being applied, even though the laws are in place, do not at all apply to the social media.
True. Very true.
The result is that because of anonymity, people say whatever they want to say, and there is a lot of money that is spent on generating public opinion, which again destroys the very concept of a fair communication. So I think that the Supreme Court needs to deal with both issues, the issues confronting the mainstream media as well as the social media. And we need to find solutions. But these are issues that the Supreme Court should be looking at instead of setting up 9 judges for some minority, for some review of some Sabrimala and stuff like that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Sir, if I am not mistaken, sir, there is a big queue of law students waiting. At least one question of the law students, if you could
one
answer.
last question because I have to be on a press
Yes,
conference.
sir, I'm really very sorry. I'm Vidya Bharati. You can ask your question. Vidya Bharati? Vidya Bharati, you're online?
Yes, ma'am. Hello, sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Sir, I have a question that, yes, ma'am. We commonly encounter the media trial along with judicial trial and very verbal attacks on and public attacks on the judiciary. So, if they consider this as their own freedom to express, what will be the impact of this judiciary for independence?
I've already answered that question.
Hello.
I already answered that question.
Answer, Pantar. What is your take on?
I've already answered that
Hello.
question. This kind of license given to the social media platforms as well as the mainstream media is not something that is acceptable, and the court must do something about it.
Yes, sir.
All right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, thank you very much. Even though there are a host of
And I said I introduced myself as a lawyer from K.R. Shankar. You are a senior lawyer. K.V. Nathan originally attended.
wait,
I can't hear you.
I said
in Q. How you hear me?
What is your take on
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
media, role of
Thank
media
you.
and independence?
It has been a pleasure. It has been a pleasure to be with you all. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
It's
sir.
been a pleasure. Please convey my warm regards to the bar. And tell them that I miss them.
Definitely,
Tell
sir.
them I miss them. I miss the bar.
I shall do, sir. I shall do, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Friends, I'm really sorry that due to time constraint, he was not able to answer all of your questions. I hope that we have a better luck in the meeting. Thank you once again.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam.